In 1985, do you remember the feeling of excitement when you first witnessed a house being blown apart by tons of popcorn? During the 80s, cinema often depicted youth through impulsive mischief. However, Real Genius chose an entirely different path. It made intelligence and erudition truly captivating. Val Kilmer, in the role of Chris Knight, was not just a talented student, but also represented a free, rebellious, yet intellectual spirit. That is why, after nearly 4 decades, the film still holds a warm and special place in our memories. However, the most magical aspect of this work does not lie entirely in the script on paper. Hidden behind the scenes you know by heart is a series of brilliant improvised performances, unexpected on-set accidents, and subtle hidden details that even the keenest viewers have missed. Today, let us travel back in time to uncover 15 secrets and incidents that inadvertently shaped an icon named Real Genius. Because sometimes the truth happening behind the lens is even crazier than building a laser machine. A hellish training camp lasting 3 weeks. One of the things I like most about The Replacements is that the movie did not just want the actors to look like football players. They wanted the actors to truly feel the life of a player. And that is why the entire main cast was put into a training camp that lasted for 3 weeks before the cameras started rolling. It sounds interesting. But imagine you are a Hollywood star used to makeup rooms, private cars, and comfortable schedules. Suddenly, you have to wake up early, train to exhaustion, learn tactics, and live under strict discipline like a real National Football League team. Just thinking about it makes me want to ask for time off. But looking back at the movie, I think everything was completely worth it. That exact period created a very natural sense of bonding among the members of the Washington Sentinels team. When they joke around in the locker room or stand side by side on the field, it does not feel like acting. It feels like people who have just overcome a difficult challenge together. Perhaps that is the secret the audience can feel even without knowing the story behind it. What about you? If you were paid a Hollywood salary, but had to go through 3 weeks of National Football League style training, would you dare to sign up? The final performance of legend Jack Warden. Sometimes behind-the-scenes facts do not surprise us with their grandeur, but with the emotional feeling when looking back. With The Replacements, one such detail is the fact that this was the final on-screen appearance of veteran actor Jack Warden. If you only watched the movie for entertainment, you might not have paid much attention to him at the time. But the older I get, the more I realize that actors like Jack Warden bring something very hard to describe. It is a sense of experience. Just by appearing in a scene, they make the character carry more weight. When watching The Replacements again today, knowing that this was his final farewell to the audience, many segments suddenly take on a different meaning. It is no longer simply a role in a comedy sports movie. It is like a beautiful final chapter in an artist's career that spanned decades. The interesting thing is that the movie talks a lot about second chances and people who are thought to be past their prime. Perhaps that is why Jack Warden's presence is even more fitting. What about you? Have you ever rewatched an old movie and suddenly realized you were witnessing the final appearance of a cinematic legend? Sen. Gathering 45 real professional players. The first thing that surprised me when learning about The Replacements is that this movie did not pretend to play football. Many sports movies often use extras and rely on camera angles and special effects to create a grand feeling. But The Replacements chose a much harder path, bringing 45 real National Football League players onto the field. And honestly, knowing that, a lot of scenes in the movie suddenly make sense. The collisions look heavier. The tackles feel genuinely painful. Even the way the players move, form up, or react after each play brings a feeling that football fans can easily recognize. I think this is one of the reasons the movie has maintained its appeal after more than 20 years. Audiences might not know exactly why a match scene is authentic, but they can feel it. There are even times when watching it again, I wonder how stressful the days must have been for the film crew's insurance companies. Because looking at some of the collisions, it feels like a real match secretly filmed rather than a Hollywood movie. What about you? When you first watched The Replacements, did you notice that the collisions in the movie were much more satisfying than in many other sports movies? Sit. The billion-dollar director of the Marvel Cinematic Universe played a madman. Every time I rewatch The Replacements, I always laugh at the character Daniel Bateman. This guy almost always appears with eyes that look like he is just waiting for someone to allow him to jump into a brawl. The interesting thing is that at the time the movie was released, very few people suspected that the person playing this role would later become one of the most powerful directors in Hollywood. That is Jon Favreau. Today, audiences remember him through Iron Man and the birth of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But in the year 2000, he was just a comedian with a very unique personality. What I like is that Bateman is not the type of character built too elaborately. He is simply a walking energy bomb. There are scenes where Jon Favreau appears for only a few minutes but makes viewers remember him forever. Perhaps because he brings a very real feeling, a little crazy, a little adorable, and a lot of enthusiasm. Thinking back, it is quite funny. The person who later created the world's largest superhero empire once spent time screaming and demanding fights on the football field. Did you realize it was Jon Favreau when you watched the movie for the first time? Woo. A real tryout invitation from a National Football League team for Keanu Reeves. This is one of those facts that sounds more like a Hollywood legend than real life. But the amazing thing is that Keanu Reeves' performance as quarterback Shane Falco made such a strong impression that the Baltimore Ravens reportedly invited him for a tryout. Of course, no one thought Keanu would give up cinema to pursue the National Football League. But just the fact that a professional team considered him seriously enough to make an offer is highly commendable. That shows Keanu did not just memorize the script and throw a few passes for the sake of it. He really took the time to learn the techniques, movements, and demeanor of a true quarterback. Every time I rewatch the movie, I always get the feeling that Shane Falco is a very believable character. You do not see a movie star trying to pretend to play football. You see a player trying to save his career. And I must confess that a part of me still wants to know what would have happened if Keanu had actually stepped onto the National Football League practice field that year. Leo. The cheerleading scene with strippers. If you ask fans which scene could not exist in modern Hollywood from The Replacements, I think many people would immediately mention the moment the strippers unexpectedly replace the striking cheerleading squad. It is a scene that is crazy, funny, and very characteristic of American cinema in the early 2000s. What I find interesting is that it was not just put in for laughs. It also reflects the chaos that a strike can create for an entire professional sports system. When everything starts to fall apart, the most bizarre solutions sometimes appear. Today, watching this segment again is like opening a time door back to another era of Hollywood. A time less worried about social media, with fewer internet controversies, and ready to accept silly ideas as long as they make the audience laugh. You might like or dislike this scene, but it is very hard to deny that this is one of the most memorable moments of the movie. And honestly, anyone who watches it for the first time will find it hard to forget. C. Keanu Reeves voluntarily took a massive pay cut. In an era where stars often negotiate every $1 million for their contracts, this story really impresses me. According to many behind-the-scenes sources, Keanu Reeves accepted a significant pay cut so the film crew would have enough budget to invite Gene Hackman to join the project. That says quite a lot about Keanu. Because if you look at Gene Hackman's career, he is not just a famous actor. He is the kind of actor whose appearance immediately elevates the whole movie. And Keanu understood that. When watching the dialogue scenes between Shane Falco and Coach Jimmy McGinty, you can feel a very special connection. Not the kind of teacher and student written on paper, but like two generations of artists truly passing energy to each other. Perhaps this is also one of the reasons Keanu has always been loved by audiences for many decades. Not only because he acts well, but also because he often puts the movie before his personal ego. Honestly speaking, Hollywood today probably needs more stories like that. Bye. Keanu Reeves had to gain 10.5 kilograms or 23 pounds. When mentioning Keanu Reeves in the late 90s, most audiences often thought of a tall and skinny young man, somewhat romantic and very different from the massive football player model we are familiar with on the National Football League field. Therefore, what surprised me the most was that Keanu had to gain more than 10 kilograms of muscle to play Shane Falco. Hearing that number might sound simple, but anyone who has ever tried to gain weight healthily understands that it is a real battle. Not just eating more, not just lifting heavier, but also maintaining discipline every day for many continuous months. What I like about Keanu is that he did not try to turn the character into a muscular superhero. Shane Falco still had the appearance of someone who had failed, lost confidence, and was looking for a chance to rebuild his life. The new muscle only helped the audience believe that he could truly step onto the field with those giants. And honestly, if I had to eat a few thousand extra calories every day to gain 23 pounds, I would probably give up in the first week. What about you? Do you think gaining weight or losing weight is harder? Joe, the National Football League boycotted and refused to cooperate. One of the most interesting things about The Replacements comes from what the movie was not allowed to use. Because the content directly touched upon the famous strike in National Football League history, the league did not cooperate with the film crew in any way. No official logos, no real team names, no copyrighted playing fields. At first glance, that sounds like a major obstacle. But sometimes limitations create creativity. Instead of relying on the National Football League brand, the film crew built their own entire world with the Washington Sentinels team and their fictional league. The surprising thing is that the audience was still completely drawn into the story. Even from my personal perspective, the absence of National Football League logos helped the movie focus more on the people. The focus was no longer on famous brands or teams. The focus was on the underestimated people trying to prove their worth. Perhaps that is the reason why, after more than 20 years, audiences still remember Shane Falco and his teammates. Sometimes, the replacements leave a longer-lasting mark than the official stars themselves. Sure, the deaf player and the real school. Out of all the members of the Washington Sentinels team, Brian Murphy is always one of the characters I have the most sympathy for. He is not the biggest star of the team, not the funniest person, but his story brings a very sincere feeling. What many audiences do not know is that Gallaudet University mentioned in the movie is completely real. This is one of the most famous educational institutions in the world for the deaf and is located right in Washington, D.C. I think this detail makes the movie more special. Because instead of creating a completely fictional deaf character, the screenwriter connected him to a real-life community. What I always like about The Replacements is that the movie does not turn Brian Murphy into a symbol or a moral lesson. He is simply a player on the team, a reliable teammate, and it is that normal treatment that creates the greatest respect. Do you agree that Brian Murphy is one of the most inspiring but least mentioned characters of the movie? She. Based on a shocking true story in 1987, this is perhaps the fact that makes me look at The Replacements with completely different eyes. Many people think this is just a familiar Hollywood story, where underestimated underdogs rise up to prove themselves. But the interesting thing is that the story actually happened in real life. In 1987, when the National Football League fell into a massive strike, the Washington Redskins team was forced to use replacement players. In theory, that was a disaster. Fans were skeptical. Professionals mocked them. No one believed those stand-ins could compete with real stars. But then the unthinkable happened. They won 3 crucial consecutive matches and helped lay the foundation for the journey to win the Super Bowl 22 championship afterward. Perhaps that is why I always like The Replacements more than many other sports movies. The movie does not sell the audience a completely fictional dream. It was built from a piece of National Football League history that many young people today have never even heard of. And if you think carefully, this is also a very American story. A place where the most underestimated people sometimes create the biggest surprises. What about you? If you were a coach in 1987, would you dare to put your trust in a roster entirely made of replacement players? Sure are. The bodyguard duo were actually former players. If you ever wondered why the Jackson brothers in the movie looked scary enough to stop a truck with their bare hands, here is the answer. The 2 actors, Faison Love and Michael Taliaferro, actually played football before stepping into the acting field. And honestly, that explains a lot of things. In many sports movies, the audience can often easily recognize which actors are trying to play athletes. But with these two guys, the feeling is completely different. The way they walk, the way they stand, the way they take up space in the frame, everything bears the posture of people who used to live on the field. What I like most is that the movie does not try to turn them into complex characters. They are simply two giant, loyal, hilarious, and extremely memorable guys. Many years after watching the movie, I might forget the score of a match in the film, but I still remember the image of the Jackson brothers appearing like two tanks capable of telling jokes. What about you? Is this the supporting character duo you remember the most in The Replacements? Shisen. The strange coincidence with the blockbuster Point Break. This is one of the details that I completely did not realize for many years. Only when rewatching both Point Break and The Replacements did I laugh at this almost unbelievable coincidence. In both movies, Keanu Reeves plays a former quarterback of Ohio State University. And ironically, both carry an unfinished career due to a major incident. In Point Break, Johnny Utah gave up his football dream after a serious injury. Meanwhile, in The Replacements, Shane Falco became a mocked name after a forgettable failure on the field. The interesting thing is that the two characters represent two very different stages in the career of Keanu. One is young, hot-headed, and full of recklessness. The other is more mature, more humble, and looking for a chance to redeem himself. Sometimes I wonder if this is a random coincidence, or if the filmmakers accidentally created a more mature version of Johnny Utah. What about you? If you had to choose a quarterback played by Keanu, would you choose Johnny Utah or Shane Falco? Shassit. The funny secret about the sumo wrestler Jumbo. One of the supporting characters that made me laugh the most in The Replacements is definitely Jumbo Fumiko. Whenever he appears on the field, everything immediately becomes chaotic in a very hilarious way. But the story behind this character is much funnier. According to some people knowledgeable about Japanese culture, the name Fumiko is actually often used for females. In other words, the most terrifying giant sumo on the team is carrying a name that in Japan, many people would think of a polite girl rather than a running tank. That is not all. His famous battle cry on the field, Nan Desu Ka, sounds extremely fierce to American audiences. But when translated, it is almost like the question, what is this? I do not know if this was an intentional joke by the screenwriter or just an interesting mistake. But it makes the character much more memorable. And that is also the very typical humor of cinema in the early 2000s. Did you ever realize this secret when watching the movie? Shiwu, the remarkable improvement in throwing distance by Keanu. The more I learn about the filmmaking process, the more I see that Keanu Reeves is the type of actor from the old generation of Hollywood. When taking on a role, he does not just memorize the lines. He wants to truly become the character. That is clearly shown through his throwing ability in The Replacements. When first entering the training camp, Keanu could only throw the ball about 15 yards. For a quarterback, that number is not really impressive. But instead of relying on special effects or stunt doubles, he threw himself into practicing almost every day. The final result was amazing. By the middle of the filming process, he was able to make long passes from 50 to 60 yards with remarkable accuracy. I think this is the kind of story that audiences usually do not see on screen. We see a beautiful pass and assume it happens naturally. But behind that are hundreds of hours of practice. Perhaps that is also the biggest secret in the career of Keanu Reeves. He does not try to be the most talented person. He is simply someone who is willing to work harder than the expectations of everyone. Those were 15 interesting secrets and incidents that shaped real genius. Nearly 4 decades have passed, and the film still lives on in our memories thanks to its rustic charm and youthful spirit. These behind-the-scenes stories prove that improvisation often creates the greatest art. Which detail surprised you the most today? Please share your thoughts in the comments section. If this video brought you warm nostalgia, please click like and subscribe to the channel. See you again soon.